Engraved on the candy dispenser were the words, "Try something different today, sweet and candy red." The police had just found SCP-942 in Redacted, Maryland, a small nowhere town off the beaten path. There was usually little happening to warrant even having a police department. Most of the time, Officer Bowles was only ever called out to deal with petty arguments between neighbors, wasting God knows how much time trying to settle parking space disputes or why the Thornton kids were riding their skateboards in the street. That was before Sweet Tooth. It had started out as a strange call on Halloween night. It wasn't exactly the usual complaints of toilet paper strewn all over neighborhoods or teenagers throwing a house party until the early hours of the morning. The 911 operator had said Mrs. Thornton sounded horrified. She was screaming, barely coherent, crying about her son, and that there was blood everywhere. Bowles and his partner, Officer Jackson, jumped in their squad car and raced across town to the hospital. They were met by a distraught Miss Thornton and two of her children, Bobby and Becky, in the waiting room. She was barely able to describe what had happened. One moment, her kids had gotten home from trick-or-treating and were rummaging through the candy they'd managed to collect. The next, Billy had been screaming and crying, in an inconsolable state of panic, as blood streamed out of his mouth. Mrs. Thornton had assumed some sick individual was responsible, having snuck razor blades into the candy. Yet, to her shock, and the officers, when the doctors brought Billy out from his examination, he apparently had no lacerations or any injuries hinting at trick candy. In fact, the doctors were baffled. The red substance coming from the child's mouth wasn't blood at all. It was just saliva. At first, it seemed like a simple, if terrifying, misunderstanding. The boy and his mother had assumed the worst, but in reality, it was just food dye from some candy staining his spit bright red. When little Billy Thornton saw the red fluid coming out of his mouth, he panicked, and really, who could blame him? Still, in order to make sure they'd been thorough, Bowles and Jackson took a statement from the boy as well. They asked Billy all the standard questions. Where was he earlier that night? What happened before he thought he was bleeding? Had anything unusual happened when he'd been out trick-or-treating with his brother and sister? Not having much to go off, Bowles thought to ask Billy if he could remember what candy he'd eaten to make this happen. The boy instantly answered that it was a gumball. When the officer pushed further, asking Billy if he could remember who exactly had given him that gumball, the child gave a description: a tall man with slicked back black hair. He'd been friendly and offered Billy candy, even though the boy hadn't come to knock on his door. The mystery figure had been walking down the sidewalk when he casually threw a gumball into Billy's candy bucket before sauntering off. Giving out candy on Halloween was hardly something Bowles could press charges for. So, for a few weeks, the incident just became a weird happening. A close shave, but with the relief that at least nobody had actually been hurt. But it quickly seemed that things wouldn't stay that way for long. Within a month, more calls started coming in, each with the same. Someone would find a huge bloody mess on the sidewalk, in a bar toilet, up the sides of walls. Bowles and Jackson would arrive to see the resultant red mess, and it definitely looked like blood. The problem was nobody ever came forward with any serious injuries. Even the local hospitals claimed they hadn't admitted anyone with severe bleeding wounds. There was never any bodies at the scene either, which at least seemed to rule out the alarming possibility of a serial killer. Some cops assumed there were small rodents in the area being killed by a local dog or cat. Others jumped to blaming teenage pranksters, leaving a mess of fake blood they'd bought on the internet just to startle the locals. There was never a concrete answer. Blood would appear in random places around town, and without any explanation for what was going on, people started to talk. Luckily for Officer Bowles, some people in the town of Redacted talked a little too much. At every scene he visited, he started asking if anyone had seen the figure that Billy Thornton had described meeting back on Halloween night. Redacted was small enough that all of its residents knew each other, most of them being extended families. Brothers and sisters living a few streets over from cousins and aunts. It meant that anyone new to the area tended to stick out. And sure enough, after asking enough times, Bowles came across someone who seemed to recognize the description of the mysterious newcomer. One of the townsfolk claimed to have seen him, a tall, handsome man with dark, slicked hair. She had witnessed him talking to a group of young women at a local bar, and judging by their giggling, blushing reactions, he'd been charming them. None of this would have registered to the innocent bystander if she hadn't caught one of the more unusual parts of his pickup routine. Watching from a distance, she watched as the unusual man slipped a paper bag out of his pocket and produced a small spherical object from within. He then dropped the small orb, less than an inch wide, into one of the girl's drinks, which earned a series of delighted giggles. The sphere was a gumball. From there, Officer Bowles was on the lookout for any new reports of this still unidentified figure. Whoever he was, there was clearly something weird about him. The sheriff advised against building a profile on a private citizen, reminding Bowles that there wasn't anything illegal about handing out candy or flirting with people, even if the methods of this mysterious man were unorthodox, to say the least. Despite the warnings, Bowles and a handful of other officers planned to keep an ear to the ground for any more rumors circulating about this mysterious man. Privately, the redacted police department started to refer to the suspect as Sweet Tooth. Nobody would see or hear much of Sweet Tooth for upwards of a month. Outside of a few scattered rumors and the occasional local who said they'd seen someone matching his description, it seemed that he was keeping a low profile. That was until the early weeks of December. Bowles and Jackson were called out to respond to an emergency. A real emergency. Someone in the area was witnessing a home invasion. A group of youths, most around their early 20s, had forcibly entered a resident's home and were wreaking havoc inside. Their neighbor, having been keeping an eye on the residence while the owner was out of town, made the call, reporting the break-in to the police. By the time the police had arrived, the perpetrators had already fled the scene. Looking around the house, Bowles and Jackson were stunned. There wasn't a single room in the house that wasn't covered in blood. It was dripping down the walls, splattered over surfaces, even stained the ceiling. And just like the other places around town, there wasn't a single body or related injury to be found anywhere. But now there was a crime scene that could be investigated, a breaking and entering, and attempted home invasion. What's more, it seemed like, if this Sweet Tooth character was involved, then he wasn't acting alone. It looked like that he had found some followers. From there, Bowles started working around the clock, checking in with any parents in town he knew had a kid in their early 20s who might have been acting strange as of late. Sure enough, a number of concerned parents came forward, describing their offspring's oddly reclusive behavior and their recent fixation with blood. Among the parents was Mr. Weaver, whose son Sam had been exhibiting the same kind of behavior. He was staying out late, spending all his time with a supposed group of friends, even though they were never seen out around town. So, suspecting this group might have been the ones responsible for the break-in, Bowles and Jackson decided to tail Sam Weaver. Either he knew where Sweet Tooth and his followers were, or he knew someone who did. After a few days spent watching the Weaver residence, Bowles spotted Sam sneaking out after dark and heading off down the street. The two cops followed in their squad car, watching Sam as he walked for a few blocks, making sure that they kept enough of a distance that he didn't spot them. He stopped at a corner, waiting under the light of a street lamp for a few minutes before another car pulled up. The driver's side window rolled down, and out leaned a figure with slicked-back black hair. Sweet Tooth. Bowles watched as Sam Weaver climbed into the passenger seat, urging Jackson to follow as the car drove off. Making sure they hung back far enough to not be noticed, the cops tailed the car. It departed from Redacted, heading a fair distance outside of town to an old farmhouse that had been abandoned for a number of years. Even at their safe tailing distance, Bowles and Jackson could see strobe lights pulsing from inside. It looked like Sweet Tooth was hosting a party. Parking up, they watched as Sweet Tooth exited his vehicle, followed by Sam and a small group of other passengers, before heading into the old farmhouse. Bowles was ready to rush in after, to burst through the door with his gun drawn and finally discover what was really going on. But Jackson urged him to stay in the car. They needed probable cause. They couldn't just go in guns blazing, especially as it could still be an ordinary party going on inside. The land that the farmhouse was on hadn't been privately owned in decades, so nobody was technically trespassing. All Bowles and Jackson could do was sit and wait until they saw reason to intervene, and they wouldn't be waiting long. After an hour, someone came rushing out of the farmhouse doors, letting out a bone-chilling scream. It was Sam Weaver, his frantic, panicked cries catching Bowles' attention. Even from a distance, they could see that the man was covered in blood. Having more than enough probable cause to go off, Balls and Jackson leapt out of their squad car, rushing over to check on Sam. He was laying in the grass, bloodied and panting, barely lucid. Jackson noted it was like he was having a panic attack. Beads of red were streaming down his face, running from his nose, out of his mouth, even leaking from his eyes. Not wasting another second, Bowles grabbed his pistol from its holster and kicked the farmhouse door open. But when he saw the horrific sight inside, he wished he hadn't. The SCP Foundation was mobilized to the town of Redacted, Maryland. They had received an encrypted message received from an embedded field agent, Redacted, posing as a member of a local police department under the alias of Officer Blake Jackson. When Foundation cleanup crews arrived, they recovered an anomalous object from what had appeared to be the scene of a strange cult-like ritual. At present, no group of interest has been linked to this activity. The object in question is seemingly an unremarkable bubblegum dispenser, capable of producing a seemingly infinite supply of standard gumballs. The machine itself is made of non-anomalous materials and can be damaged via conventional means, as has since been discovered during preliminary testing. The candy dispensed from the machine, however, is anything but conventional confectionery. Designated as SCP-942-1, while the gumball machine is referred to as SCP-942-2. These seemingly innocuous candies have an unusual effect on the human body. From the moment that they are ingested, an instance of SCP-942-1 will cause all of the consumer's bodily fluids to heavily coagulate, causing all saliva, sweat, mucus, tears, stomach acid, and any other internal fluid to take on the consistency, smell, color, and appearance of blood. The resultant crimson coagulant is indistinguishable from blood, at least when simply observed. During initial testing, SCP Foundation researchers conducted tests wherein members of D-Class personnel were instructed to consume one SCP-942-1 gumball. Then samples of their saliva were gathered for analysis. Despite looking, smelling, and acting like blood, chemically analyzing these samples, as well as the use of infrared spectroscopy, revealed that the affected bodily fluids do not lose their original composition. While their appearance is altered, bodily fluids are not replaced with excess blood. They merely resemble blood. This has no noted effect on how these fluids, nor a person's actual blood, function within the body. D-Class test subjects were observed as having ordinary bodily function after consuming SCP-942-1 gumballs, or blood candy, as they quickly became colloquially known among research personnel. Other than coagulating, the affected fluids retain their normal properties and show no anomalous reactions to natural chemical processes, at least while remaining inside the body. However, once fluids exit the body, there are significant problems. Foundation researchers assigned to SCP-942, under lead researcher Dr. Ian Blunt, have concurred that any fluid affected by SCP-942-1 consumption can only be noticed after it exits the body. This is especially true of fluids that are predominantly internal. However, the anomalous effects of the blood candy become easier to notice when they affect fluids like the mucus in the nasal cavity or the surface of the eye. Subjects that consume SCP-942-1 will quickly exhibit symptoms like bloodshot eyes and consistently low-intensity nosebleeds, even tears that resemble blood. Any regions of an affected subject's body that are prone to higher concentrations of sweat, in particular armpits and toes, will be covered in a crust of dried blood that will replenish in perpetuity, even if cleaned thoroughly. A number of D-Class subjects have also reported a considerable degree of discomfort while using the bathroom after consuming blood candy. It has been noted by Foundation research teams assigned to SCP-942 that a significant portion of their test subjects appear to have suffered severe panic attacks upon witnessing the effects of SCP-942-1 consumption. One D-Class member's symptoms included the aforementioned sweating that resembles sustained bleeding. Their condition only worsened when they started crying, only to realize their tears also resembled blood. Attempting to explain to the subject that their bodily fluids merely looked like blood did little to ease the D-Class's state. They subsequently had to be remanded into the on-site medical wing for sedation and later psychological evaluation. Despite the frequency of panic attacks among subjects who have consumed SCP-942-1 gumballs, Foundation experts in anomalous parapsychology have conducted thorough reviews of all affected test subjects. All commonly describe intense feelings of distress after exposure to the blood candy and its effects. though there is reportedly nothing to indicate that these panic attacks are anomalously caused by SCP-942-1 consumption. In a review co-signed by the head of the Foundation's Center for the Study of Anomalous Parapsychology, researchers noted that panicking upon seeing what appears to be excessive blood emerging from the eyes, nose, mouth, and other affected areas is a completely understandable response. While these panic attacks are mundane reactions to SCP-942 and not directly caused by consumption, in more extreme cases, test subjects have expressed an intense urge to remove the excessive blood by any means necessary. During one test, a member of D-Class became so erratic in trying to prevent what he thought was widespread internal bleeding that he redacted until stopped by safety staff. After being treated for his severe injuries, the affected subject needed to be rehydrated through the use of an intravenous drip. Continued monitoring after this incident has concluded that he developed severe hypochondria and an obsession with personal hygiene. However, these are also believed to have been mundane, non-anomalous reactions to SCP-942-1 exposure. It is still unknown the exact anomalous mechanisms by which SCP-942-2 is able to infinitely produce blood candy. Given that it is the only known source of SCP-942-1, any destructive testing on the gumball machine has been halted to avoid potentially negating the anomalous effects of the produced confectionery. Unless authorized by Dr. Blunt for use in an experimentation, SCP-942-2 is to remain stored in a locked safe deposit box at Site Redacted's low-risk object storage unit. Should any member of personnel become affected by SCP-942-1 consumption, they are to be remanded to Foundation-controlled facilities only. All contact with civilians or any personnel with clearance lower than Level 2 will remain strictly forbidden, until such a time that the effects of the blood candy has ceased. Affected personnel may additionally be banned from interacting with any other anomalous items during this time, and must undergo high-priority psychological screening, as well as first aid. If a civilian is found to have experienced symptoms related to SCP-942-1 consumption, they are to be recruited or terminated at the discretion of Dr. Blunt, with suitable cover stories deployed in the event of termination. At present, there is no known cure for SCP-942. The SCP Foundation have discovered no evidence of the existence of any other instances of SCP-942-2, the gumball machine appearing to be unique. If any are discovered, they are to be retrieved as soon as possible, and the surrounding area checked for any persons that may have consumed blood candy. If it is infeasible to retrieve any other instances of SCP-942-2, then destruction is authorized under the authority of Dr. Blunt. The Foundation is aware of attempted recreational usage of SCP-942-1 that occurred prior to its discovery. Residents of the town of Redacted, Maryland have been administered with amnestics in order to forget any family members affected by consumption of blood candy. Those exposed have been detained and evaluated for potential recruitment, testing, or termination on a case-by-case basis. The cover story of an illegal rave conducted by a group who previously broke into a resident's home have been disseminated in order to prevent the truth from reaching the public. The individuals involved appeared to have been recreationally indulging in activities related to Renfield syndrome, also known as clinical vampirism. None have been able to provide actionable intelligence on the origins of the SCP-942-2 gumball machine or its former owner. The individual known to local police as Sweet Tooth, along with some of his associates, are believed to still be at large. Now check out SCP-2396, Miss Sweetie Will Turn You Into Candy, and SCP-3077 Sugar Golems for more.